And it's recently been reported that Camilla is likely to be a bit nervous about the upcoming coronation and that her ex-husband, Andrew Parker Bowles, will also be there.
At 86, Andrew Parker Bowles sits quietly in his wheelchair in his peaceful country home in Wiltshire. No reporters, no royal advisors, no one standing beside him to remind him what he is allowed to say. On the table before him lies only an old leather-bound diary. That book has barely been opened in 3 decades. But if the pages truly contain what Andrew has kept secret, then the whole story of Camilla Charles and their 1995 marriage breakdown may never have been as simple as the public has heard. For years, the official story has been very concise. Camilla loved Charles. Andrew understood that. The divorce was peaceful. Andrew politely stepped aside so his ex-wife could finally be with the future king. There was no public battle, no accusations, no revenge memoirs. There was only silence. But the diary before Andrew suggested a completely different possibility, that he hadn't voluntarily disappeared, that he had been forced into an almost unbearable choice to protect military honor, to protect the future of his 2 children, to protect the stability of the monarchy, or to stand up and protect his own name. And in the end, Andrew chose to sacrifice himself. He lost his marriage. He lost the house that had once belonged to his family. He allowed the press to portray him as a weak husband, a man who couldn't keep his wife. But why would a military officer who had faced war and terror choose silence in the face of the greatest humiliation of his life? Did Andrew Parker Bowles truly leave Camilla because he had accepted defeat? Or was he forced to sacrifice everything to protect an institution greater than himself? If you're new to the channel, hit subscribe so you don't miss the stories hidden behind the royal doors. And let us know where in the world are you following this story from. Because this secret didn't begin with the 1995 divorce. It began 4 years earlier under a torrential downpour when Princess Diana walked straight up to Andrew and whispered a warning that made him look back at his entire life. That warning sounded unbelievable. For years afterward, almost no one knew that it didn't begin with the 1995 divorce, but with a cold, rainy afternoon in May 1991 at the badminton horse trials. It was a familiar equestrian event for the British aristocracy, where impeccably tailored uniforms, black umbrellas, and glasses of champagne created an atmosphere as peaceful as any spring before. Andrew Parker Bowles stood near the entrance to the reception tent, silently observing the crowd with the instincts of a seasoned military officer. He wasn't the main character of the event. No one expected him to speak, and no cameras were pointed at him. All attention was focused on the members of the royal family. Then Princess Diana appeared. She entered with 2 guards. What surprised Andrew wasn't Diana's presence, but the direction she walked. Instead of stopping to greet the guests or the organizers, Diana walked straight toward him. Those around them continued their conversation, almost oblivious to the brief encounter. Diana spoke for only a few minutes, but every word was enough to leave a lasting impression on Andrew for the rest of his life. She said that they were both being watched, not by the press, not by the nosy, but by the men in gray, the way Diana referred to the powerful figures operating behind the closed doors of the palace. According to her warning, Andrew's phone might be being tapped. Conversations with Camilla, calls to their 2 children, Tom and Laura, even exchanges related to military affairs, might no longer be private. Diana also said that what they wanted was more than just monitoring a crumbling marriage. They wanted to know how much Andrew truly understood about the relationship between Charles and Camilla, and whether he would become a risk to the plan they were quietly preparing. Diana believed a new royal structure was taking shape. For that structure to become a reality, some people would have to leave the stage. She looked directly at Andrew and said that they might both be necessary losses in the process. Andrew didn't respond. He didn't ask questions. Neither did he seem surprised. As a soldier, he understood the value of remaining calm in the face of unverified information. But even after leaving badminton horse trials, those words kept echoing in his mind. Back at the barracks, Andrew didn't report to the police or contact the press. Instead, he quietly contacted trusted military and security personnel to check the telephone system at the Wiltshire house. Within just 48 hours, the investigation yielded a terrifying discovery. A surveillance device was found inside the telephone junction box outside the house. If this account is true in the world of the story, it means that for an indefinite period, almost every conversation Andrew had could have been recorded exchanges with Camilla, instructions to Tom and Laura, calls related to military work, and even private arguments behind closed doors. That moment completely changed how Andrew perceived what was happening around him. This was no longer simply a story of a crumbling marriage or an extramarital affair. In Andrew's mind, it had become a sign of an organized surveillance network far larger than he had ever imagined. Yet most surprisingly, Andrew still didn't act immediately. He did not publicly disclose his discovery. He did not make any accusations. He chose to remain silent, to continue observing and waiting. Because in the officer's mind, if there really was someone behind this whole affair, the answer he needed would not lie in public debates. It could only emerge when he confronted the man at the center of all the speculation, Prince Charles. But Andrew Parker Bowles wasn't the type to easily accept living in suspicion. After the surveillance equipment was discovered and secretly dismantled, he no longer viewed Princess Diana's warnings as a worrying hypothesis. In his mind, it had become confirmation that forces were silently watching his every move. However, instead of engaging in a public confrontation with the press or bringing everything to light, Andrew chose the familiar course of action of a soldier calm patient, and only acting when the time was right. That opportunity came in July 1992. The location was Cirencester Park, where a private polo match was taking place, attended by many members of the royal family, military officers, and carefully selected guests. On the field, Prince Charles played as usual, while Andrew appeared as a guest in the area reserved for the military and nobility. No one knew that for Andrew, that match was just the beginning. What he was really waiting for would happen after the final whistle. As the last spectators began to leave the stands, reporters gathered outside, and the backstage area gradually quieted down. Andrew walked toward the dressing room. He stood waiting right outside the door until Charles entered. No cameras, no Camilla, no public witnesses. Just two men who had known each other's lives so well. Andrew didn't begin with accusations. He didn't mention his failing marriage either. Instead, he quietly took a handwritten note from his briefcase and placed it on the chair next to Charles's polo equipment. It wasn't a letter. Neither was it a threat. It was a list. On those lines of paper were a series of notes Andrew had secretly collected over months, traces of surveillance around the Wiltshire house. The timing of unusual transfers of security personnel communication routes, supposedly leading to cabinet office, and details that led him to believe the surveillance wasn't the work of a single individual. Andrew looked directly at Charles and spoke very briefly. The surveillance must stop immediately. Otherwise, he would use his planned speech at the Royal United Services Institute to publicly reveal everything he knew. Not for revenge, but to force those behind it to come forward. Charles didn't get angry. Neither did he completely deny what Andrew had just said. Instead, Charles responded with a cryptic remark that there were decisions beyond his control, especially when security agencies claimed they were acting in the interests of the Constitution and the stability of the monarchy. The room fell silent. Charles didn't take the paper. He turned his back, walked out of the dressing room, and left the list untouched on the chair. The meeting ended in just a few minutes, but as the story unfolded, its repercussions spread faster than anyone imagined. Exactly 2 days later, the technical team Andrew had secretly contacted returned to inspect the Wiltshire house. The listening device was gone. There was no explanation, no record. No one took responsibility. Andrew believed he had just won a small victory. At least he had forced someone to act. But what he didn't know was that this discreet confrontation would completely change his standing in the eyes of the royal security advisors. Andrew was no longer seen as Camilla's ex-husband. He became a target of intense surveillance, a highly trained officer, a man with extensive connections in the military and intelligence circles, a man with a habit of keeping records, and most importantly, a man not easily swayed by money or status. If surveillance wasn't enough to make Andrew back down, then those behind the story would have to find something else. Something they believed even the toughest soldier wouldn't trade. That was the honor of his comrades who had fallen in the horrific bombing of Hyde Park in 1982. If the confrontation at Cirencester Park made Andrew Parker Bowles realize he had entered an unseen war, what followed truly made him realize the price of continued resistance. Just over a year after his meeting with Charles Andrew, received a secret invitation to the Cavalry and Guards Club in Piccadilly. No official title, no agenda, just a private meeting with Sir Michael Peat, described as playing a crucial role in the palace's advisory network. But to understand why that meeting became the biggest turning point in Andrew's life, the story takes the viewer back more than a decade. July 20th, 1982. A seemingly ordinary summer morning in London. The household cavalry is moving through South Carriage Drive, Hyde Park, in familiar military fashion. Just seconds later, an IRA nail bomb exploded, tearing through the peaceful atmosphere in the heart of the capital. 4 soldiers from the Blues and Royals Regiment were killed instantly. 7 horses lay dead on the pavement. Smoke blood metal fragments and screams filled the area. Andrew Parker Bowles, then the commanding officer, reportedly arrived just minutes after the explosion. He rushed to the scene without hesitation. He and his comrades pulled the survivors from the rubble. He coordinated rescue efforts amidst the chaos. He tried to keep his unit's morale from collapsing as each of his soldiers lay dead on the streets of London. It was not just a military tragedy. It was the most painful memory Andrew carried for the rest of his life. Following the bombing, all the investigative documents were compiled into a secret file called Operation Ironclad. The file was sealed and virtually disappeared from public view for years, until the meeting in October 1993. In the quiet room of the Cavalry and Guards Club, Sir Michael Peat got straight to the point. He placed a page from Operation Ironclad before Andrew. According to the content of the story, the page referred to a report about a suspicious vehicle that had appeared days before the bombing. The report had been submitted to the administrative system, but had not been processed in a timely manner. Sir Michael did not directly accuse Andrew. He calmly explained what could happen if the document were to ever appear in the press. Andrew had been a commanding officer. Public opinion could ultimately hold him responsible. The name of the Blues and Royals Regiment could be dragged into a new controversy. The families of the fallen soldiers would have to relive the pain they thought had ended years ago. No further threats were needed. Andrew understood the message being sent to him. He faced a grim choice. If he continued to confront the palace, the files could be leaked under the guise of an anonymous source, turning the sacred memory of the soldiers into a subject of controversy in the newspapers. If he remained silent, the entire file would remain untouched in the archives. Andrew didn't argue. He didn't sign any documents either. He simply stood up quietly, saluted in military fashion, and left the room. But just before leaving, a small detail caught his attention. Sir Michael had inadvertently left a copy of the document on the table. Andrew picked it up. Turning the document over, he discovered a digital timestamp indicating it had just been printed from a cabinet office device at the very moment the communications plans concerning Charles were being prepared. Andrew carefully folded the paper and placed it in his briefcase. He didn't see it as a weapon to attack. He saw it as a last line of defense. He had enough evidence to protect himself if cornered. But Andrew also understood a truth more painful than anything else. He could use the paper to defend his own honor, but the price could be the honor of his fallen comrades at Hyde Park, men he had sworn never to let be exploited again. Andrew Parker Bowles left the Cavalry and Guards Club that day with a feeling he had never experienced in his entire military career. For the first time in his life, he understood that some wars could not be won by discipline, courage, or the honor of a soldier. This time, the adversary wasn't on the battlefield. They operated in closed offices behind memos, media plans, and decisions made before the public knew what was happening. Yet Andrew still hoped it would end there. He tucked a copy of the Operation Ironclad file into his briefcase, continued his daily life, and waited to see if the subtle warnings were merely a psychological tactic. The answer came on June 29, 1994. That evening, Andrew sat alone in front of the television screen. On national television, Prince Charles appeared in an interview watched by the entire nation. When Charles publicly admitted to the extramarital affair, millions of viewers saw it as a rare moment of honesty from the heir to the throne. The press lauded his frankness. Debates quickly erupted across England. But Andrew saw a completely different picture. He didn't just hear what Charles said. He observed the timing. He observed how the program was staged. And most importantly, he began to envision the consequences that interview would have on himself. In Andrew's mind, from that moment on, every choice he made led to failure. If he continued to live with Camilla, the public would see him as a powerless man, accepting a marriage that existed only in name. If he became angry or publicly refuted the accusations, he would be portrayed as a bitter husband trying to ruin Charles's future. If he accepted the divorce, public opinion would believe he was politely stepping aside to make way for someone else's love. But if he released the documents he possessed, he could be seen as a leaker of confidential information and face unforeseen legal consequences. It was the perfect trap. A trap where no matter which path he chose, Andrew would pay the price. A few weeks after the interview, while media attention was still focused on Charles and Camilla, Andrew received a brown envelope at his usual London club. No sender's name, no message. Inside was a neatly organized stack of documents, BBC broadcast schedules, internal notes supposedly from the Palace press office, and numerous papers dated before the interview. To Andrew, this suggested that the program wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, but had been planned for a long time. He didn't take those documents to the police. Neither did he give them to any journalists. Andrew quietly opened his familiar leather briefcase. One by one, he placed inside his personal diary a copy of Operation Ironclad notes on surveillance around the Wiltshire house, a delivery receipt he believed was related to Camilla, and now the newly received documents. The briefcase grew heavier and heavier, not because of the papers, but because of the secrets it held. However, the biggest event was yet to come. At the end of 1994, Andrew went to the hospital for a routine military health check. He thought it was just another routine procedure, but the results completely changed all his calculations. Doctors discovered a serious heart problem and warned that he might face a risky surgery. Andrew began to believe that his remaining time might be shorter than he had ever imagined. For the first time, he no longer thought of himself as a husband. He thought of himself as a father. If he died while still legally married to Camilla, the family debts might remain unresolved. Camilla would continue to be in an ambiguous position. Charles might not have any clear financial responsibility. And what worried Andrew most was that Tom and Laura might have to live their entire lives under the shadow of a never-ending scandal. That very moment led Andrew to make the most painful decision of his life. When he entered the divorce proceedings in January 1995, he was no longer just a betrayed husband. He entered the room with the mindset of a father who believed he might not have much time left to protect his children. When Andrew Parker Bowles walked through the doors of his lawyer's office one January morning in 1995, he knew he would never be able to walk back to life as he once was. It wasn't a room for marital arguments. There were no pleas, no tears. Neither were there hopes of reconciliation. In that room were only neatly stacked files on the desks, lawyers in dark suits, a few senior advisors, and the heavy atmosphere of a long-prepared decision. The mediator was Lord Goodman. He didn't appear to represent Camilla or Charles. Instead, he was described as representing a group of officials and advisors concerned that if the divorce turned into a public lawsuit, the consequences would extend far beyond a broken marriage. According to the explanation given at the meeting, things could quickly spiral out of control. The Duchy of Cornwall's finances risk being audited. Charles's personal assets could be subjected to public scrutiny. Expenses for security private trips and other internal activities could be dragged into the investigation. Most importantly, public trust in the monarchy could suffer an unprecedented shock. Lord Goodman didn't ask Andrew to love Camilla again. Neither did he ask Andrew to forgive Charles. He simply presented Andrew with two options. The first option was to oppose the divorce, release all the documents he possessed to the public, and let the matter be decided by law and the media. The second option was to sign accepting that the world would believe he was a failed man in exchange for his two children not having to grow up amidst a protracted war. Andrew gazed intently at the documents. He didn't ask himself what was fair. He only wondered what would cause the least harm to Tom and Laura. Finally, he picked up the pen. A signature closed nearly 20 years of marriage. But it also opened the loneliest period of his life. Remarkably, Andrew didn't accept a huge sum of money in exchange for his silence. No millions of pounds were transferred into an account. No secret estate deals. No bargaining to sell his honor. He refused to turn his broken marriage into a business deal. The price he paid came quickly. Middlewick House, the home that had been so closely associated with his family for so many years, had to be sold. The money wasn't enough to start a life of luxury. It was only enough to pay off the outstanding mortgage-accumulated debts and necessary family expenses. After everything was over, Andrew was left with only his military pension and moved into a small rented apartment in London. He lost his house. He lost much of the social standing he once had. He lost the sympathy of a segment of the public who only saw him as a husband abandoned by his wife. And above all, he lost the right to defend himself against what the press wrote. Because every time he spoke out, he risked revealing secrets he had promised to keep. Yet Andrew never saw himself as a victim. He always believed that one day Tom and Laura would be old enough to understand that their father hadn't sold their mother to the future king. He chose to sacrifice his own reputation so that his children wouldn't have to live through an endless war. In the summer of 1995, as the divorce faded from the front pages of newspapers, Andrew began to develop a strange habit. He regularly went to the Oxford and Cambridge Club, chose a quiet corner in the library, and quietly took notes. His small blue notebooks gradually filled with dates, names, and detailed notes about security personnel transfers, Charles's schedule changes in palace plans, and even those he believed had pressured him. Andrew didn't send these notes to anyone, nor did he prepare a memoir for publication. It wasn't the record of someone seeking revenge. It was the way a former army officer, having lost almost all his possessions and reputation, created a final layer of insurance for himself. If he were ever forced to speak, he wouldn't just have memories, he would have documents. The palace quickly realized that Andrew hadn't given up his briefcase full of secrets. And when warnings and pressure were no longer enough to make him relent, they decided to change strategy. This time, instead of targeting Andrew directly, they turned their attention to the two people he loved most in the world. Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Parker Bowles. After the divorce, Andrew Parker Bowles virtually disappeared from the media spotlight. The press shifted all its attention to Charles and Camilla, while the man who had once been at the center of the storm was left with quiet afternoons. In his small London apartment, his briefcase filled with documents unknown to anyone. But that silence didn't last long. In August 1995, while Andrew was having lunch at his usual club, a sealed envelope was placed before him. No sender's name, no signature, just a few short, carefully typed lines. The contents didn't mention Andrew. It only mentioned two names, Tom and Laura. That was the first time Andrew understood that those behind the crisis had changed their approach. They were no longer trying to persuade him with pressure or confidential files. Instead, they were touching on something he always valued above his own honor: his children. 2 months later, in October 1995, Andrew agreed to meet Mark Shand, Camilla's brother, at the Turf Club in London. This wasn't a meeting between two family members. It was a meeting between two men who both understood they were speaking on behalf of others. Mark calmly conveyed a message to Andrew, supposedly from Highgrove House. The message wasn't coercive. It was more like an offer. Accordingly, the palace wanted Andrew to start a new life. A former husband remaining single, carrying bitterness, and frequently appearing in public would only fuel the press's relentless digging up of the past. As long as Andrew was seen as a victim of a broken marriage, Charles and Camilla would find it difficult to build a stable public image. In return, Andrew received assurances that he valued more than any money. Tom would have the opportunity to pursue his passion for publishing and media. Laura wouldn't be excluded from London's cultural and artistic circles. Their two children wouldn't have to bear the consequences of their parents' decisions. Andrew sat in silence for a long time. He didn't ask if those promises were in writing. He didn't ask for any financial guarantees for himself either. The only thing he wanted to know was whether Tom and Laura would truly be allowed to move on without the shadow of the divorce haunting them for the rest of their lives. After that meeting, Andrew made his final decision. In February 1996, he married Rosemary Pittman in a small ceremony at the Chelsea Registry Office. There was no royal ceremony, no motorcade, no long lines of reporters crowding outside. Andrew wore a simple gray suit. Rosemary held only a small bouquet of winter flowers in her hand. According to the media at the time, this was seen as a sign that Andrew had moved on from the past and begun a new chapter in his life. But Andrew understood that the marriage held another meaning. It helped the press stop portraying him as the abandoned husband. It diverted attention away from his former family. And most importantly, it opened the door for Tom and Laura to grow up in a more peaceful environment. However, that peace didn't mean all the wounds had disappeared. In November 1997, at a regimental dinner, Andrew walked into the room with the familiar calm demeanor of a former officer. But many of his former comrades silently avoided his gaze. No one knew what to say. Condolences, apologies, or pretending nothing had happened. Andrew did nothing to ease their awkwardness. He merely smiled faintly, maintaining his military posture, and continued his dinner without offering any explanation. Years passed. Tom gradually became a writer and a familiar face in the culinary world. Laura established her position in London's art scene. Both maintained their relationship with the royal social circle without being drawn into their parents' public confrontations. Andrew saw his wish come true. He had protected his children, but in return, he accepted the world's belief that he was a failed man, a husband who had willingly stepped back to let history pass him by. 10 years later, an invitation arrived in Andrew's hands. That was an invitation to Charles and Camilla's wedding in 2005. That moment also marked Andrew's belief that he had fulfilled the final condition of their agreement to remain silent. In 2005, when Andrew Parker Bowles received an invitation to Charles and Camilla's wedding at Windsor Guildhall, he understood that a long chapter in his life was finally coming to an end. The press described Andrew's presence as symbolic of a civilized reconciliation. The ex-husband appeared to bless the woman who had once been his wife, and the man who had stood between their marriages for so many years. Andrew wasn't there to prove he had forgiven. He was there to confirm that Camilla had finally received public accountability from Charles. He was there to ensure Tom and Laura weren't left behind. And he was there to witness the fulfillment of the agreement he had accepted back in 1995. Throughout the ceremony, Andrew maintained the composure of a soldier. He didn't seek Camilla's gaze, nor did he try to stand close to Charles. As the ceremony concluded and guests began to move toward Windsor Castle for the reception, Andrew quietly returned to his waiting car outside. He left alone. There was no confrontation, no explanation. Just a man walking away from a place where history was being rewritten without his name appearing in it. In 2010, Rosemary Pittman passed away. The woman who had been Andrew's companion throughout his life after their divorce was no more. Andrew continued to live a private life in Wiltshire, avoiding interviews and refusing any offers to write a memoir. At the end of 2025, he appeared at Westminster Abbey for a state event. King Charles and Queen Camilla walked down the aisle before hundreds of guests. Andrew was seated close enough to maintain proper ceremonial etiquette, but far enough away to avoid appearing in the same television frame as Camilla. In early 2026 at St. James's Palace, that distance was maintained. As Camilla walked through the reception room, a member of her staff subtly altered her route. A small movement, but enough to prevent her from directly passing Andrew. There was no anger, no reproach, only a distance that stretched across decades. Yet there was one place Andrew frequently returned to: Hyde Park Barracks. He held a special pass that allowed him access to the barracks. Each month, usually after dark, Andrew would walk through the stables chat with the young soldiers and stop before the rooms that held memories of his military career. It was the only place where his name wasn't associated with Charles or Camilla. There he wasn't a failed husband. He was just a soldier. The story returns to the present. Andrew Parker Bowles, at age 86, sits before his worn, leather-bound diary. Inside are Diana's surveillance documents, Operation Ironclad files, agreements concerning Tom and Laura, the real reason he signed the divorce papers, and names never before revealed. Andrew's silence isn't because he has nothing to say. He's silent because every truth revealed could hurt someone he tried to protect. He didn't defeat the palace. Neither was he publicly exonerated. He simply kept his promise, protecting his children and continuing to walk through the stables after nightfall, always so close to history, yet forever outside the frame. So the final question is no longer why Andrew Parker Bowles left Camilla. The real question is, when the diary is fully revealed, will the public see a failed husband or a man who sacrificed his entire life to protect his family and the crown? Do you think Andrew remained silent out of loyalty for Tom and Laura, or because he knew the truth could have devastating consequences? Leave your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next part of the story.